They thought she was just an old woman with a bad attitude. For 45 years, Martha O'Connell scrubbed floors, changed bedpans, and took orders from doctors half her age. They called her ancient. They called her slow. On the night of her retirement, nobody even brought a cake. But when the doors of the ER burst open and a team of Navy SEALs stormed in, carrying a high-value target, they didn't ask for the chief surgeon. They didn't ask for the hospital director. They pointed their rifles at the floor, looked at the old woman mopping the corner, and the commander dropped to one knee. He didn't call her nurse. He called her Mom. And what happened next wiped the smiles off everyone's faces forever. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Chicago hummed with that familiar, headache-inducing buzz that Marty O'Connell had lived with for 45 years. It was 18 more hours, December 14th. Outside, the wind was howling off Lake Michigan, whipping sleet against the ambulance bay doors. Inside, the ER was in a lull, the calm before the inevitable Friday night storm of drunk drivers, bar fights, and domestic disputes. Marty tightened the drawstring of her scrubs. They were navy blue, faded to a dull grey at the knees. She walked over to the nurse's station, her orthopedic shoes squeaking faintly on the linoleum. She picked up a chart, her knuckles swollen with arthritis, and glanced at the clock. 6 hours. 6 hours left, and then she was done. Not just for the shift. Done. Forever. Marty, bed 4 needs a bedpan change, a voice called out. It was Kevin Julius, the new shift administrator. Kevin was 28 years old, had an MBA online, and wore a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. He had been at St. Jude's for 3 months and had spent every single day of it trying to make Marty's life miserable enough that she would quit before her pension fully vested. He failed. She was retiring on her own terms, to the day. "I'm on it, Mr. Julius," Marty said, her voice raspy. She didn't look up. She never looked up. It was part of the act. The invisible old woman. The furniture. "And Marty?" Kevin added, not bothering to lower his voice as he leaned over the counter to flirt with a young triage nurse named Jessica. "Try to be a little quicker than last time? We're trying to keep our metrics up. Efficient turnover, right?" Jessica giggled nervously. She liked Marty, but she feared Kevin. Marty didn't reply. She just walked toward bed 4. She moved with a deceptive slowness. To the untrained eye, she looked like a grandmother shuffling to the mailbox. To a trained eye, if there had been any in this civilian hospital, they would have noticed that her center of gravity never wavered. Her footsteps made almost no sound despite the squeaky shoes, and her eyes were constantly scanning the perimeter, checking exits, checking equipment, checking pulse oxidizers. She attended to the patient in bed 4, a homeless man named Arthur, whom she had treated 50 times over the last decade. "They tell me you're leaving, Marty," Arthur wheezed, clutching her wrist with a grime-stained hand. "Time to go, Artie," she said softly, efficiently adjusting his IV line with a dexterity that belied her age. "My watch is over. Who's going to sneak me the extra sandwiches?" "Kieran will. I trained her well." Marty finished up and walked back to the station. She looked around. There were no balloons, no streamers. There was no sheet cake from Costco sitting in the break room with "Happy Retirement" scrawled in icing. It stung. Just a little. Not because she wanted the praise. Marty hated praise, but because of the sheer erasure of it all. She had saved probably 3,000 lives in this building. She had held the hands of dying children. She had stopped arterial bleeds with her bare thumbs when the trauma surgeons were too panicked to find the clamps. And now, she was just an overhead cost being removed from the ledger. Kieran Jenkins, a 24-year-old RN, who reminded Marty of herself a lifetime ago, sidled up to her. Kieran was the only one who seemed to care. "I bought a cupcake," Kieran whispered, pulling a smashed chocolate confection out of her scrub pocket. "It got a little squished during the code in the ICU, but happy retirement, Marty." Marty looked at the squashed cupcake. A rare, genuine smile cracked her stern face. "Thanks, kid. Keep it for yourself. You'll need the sugar. Barometric pressure is dropping. It's going to be a bloodbath tonight." "The weather?" Kieran asked. "Not the weather," Marty said, her eyes drifting to the ambulance bay doors. "The energy, the static. Something is coming." Kevin Julius walked by, tapping on his clipboard. "O'Connell, less chatting, more stocking. Trauma Room 1 is low on gauze. If we get a multi-car pile-up, I don't want to be hearing excuses from you on your last night." "Yes, sir," Marty said. She walked to the supply closet. As she reached for the gauze, her sleeve rode up. On her inner forearm, faded almost to invisibility, was a thin, jagged white scar. It wasn't from a surgery, it was from shrapnel, and beneath it, a faint tattoo that she had tried to burn off with a lighter in 1975, leaving only a blur of blue ink. She traced the scar with her thumb. Just 6 hours, she told herself. Just stay invisible for 6 more hours. But the universe, as Marty knew better than anyone, had a sense of humor. And it was usually a cruel one. By 21 hours, the blizzard had shut down the I-90. The ER was deceptively quiet. The roads were too dangerous for the usual drunks to drive, and the gangbangers were staying inside. Marty was sitting in the break room, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. She was watching the local news on the small, wall-mounted TV. "Reports of a military training exercise gone wrong near the Great Lakes Naval Station," the reporter was saying, struggling to stand upright in the wind. "We are hearing unconfirmed reports of a helicopter crash, but authorities have sealed off a 5-mile radius." Marty's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward. The ticker at the bottom of the screen mentioned live fire and hazardous conditions. "Training exercise my arse," she muttered. Kieran walked in. "Talking to yourself, Marty?" "Look at the footage," Marty said, pointing a calloused finger at the screen. "That smoke is black, thick, oily black. That's aviation fuel. And look at the perimeter. Those aren't local cops. Those are MPs. And that chopper, that's not a standard transport." Kieran laughed. "You watch too many movies, Marty. It's just a crash." Sad, though. "It's not a movie," Marty said, her voice dropping an octave. "That's a Black Hawk, a modified one. Night Stalker variant. They don't fly those for training exercises in a blizzard over Chicago." Before Kieran could ask how an old ER nurse knew what a Night Stalker variant was, the red phone on the wall, the disaster line, rang. It was a sound that made every stomach in the hospital drop. Kevin Julius burst into the hallway, his face pale. "All right, people, listen up. We have an incoming, but it's weird." "Weird how?" asked Dr. Hansen, the night shift attending. Hansen was a good doctor, but he was soft. He had never seen a war zone. He panicked when the blood bank ran low. "Dispatch says they aren't coming in an ambulance," Kevin said, looking at his pager with confusion. "They said they are inbound heavy. They said to clear the bay. Completely." "Who is it?" Hansen asked. "They didn't say. Just said, critical trauma, high value." And then the line went dead. Marty stood up. She poured her coffee into the sink. The trembling in her hands, which usually plagued her due to age, suddenly stopped. Her spine straightened. The fatigue that had etched lines into her face seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard focus. "Clear the bay," Marty said. It wasn't a suggestion. Kevin blinked. "Excuse me? I give the orders here, O'Connell." "You heard the man," Marty said, walking past him into the hallway. If they aren't in an ambulance, they're in SUVs, armored ones. They need turning radius. Move the staff cars. Now. I'm not moving my BMW for a... Boom! The double doors of the ambulance bay didn't open. They were practically blown off their hinges. Headlights, blindingly bright, cut through the darkness of the ER hallway. Tires screeched on the linoleum. An impossible sound inside a hospital. Two massive, blacked-out SUVs skidded into the triage area, knocking over a row of wheelchairs. The engines roared, filling the sterile space with the smell of diesel and exhaust. Kevin Julius shrieked, "What the hell? You can't drive in here! I'm calling the police!" The doors of the lead SUV flew open. 4 men stepped out. They were giants. They wore tactical gear, not police uniforms. No badges, no name tapes. Just multicam black, heavy plate carriers and assault rifles that were raised and ready. They moved with a fluid, terrifying precision. They didn't look like people. They looked like machines made of meat and Kevlar. "Everyone back!" the lead man shouted. His voice was like a thunderclap. He wore a balaclava, pulled down to his chin, revealing a jagged scar running from his ear to his jaw. This was Master Chief Jackson, Jax Miller. "Get on the ground, now!" Another operator screamed, sweeping his rifle across the room. Dr. Hansen threw his hands up and dropped to his knees. The triage nurses dove behind the desk. Kevin Julius stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I am the administrator," Kevin stammered. "Secure the perimeter," Jax barked. 2 of the operators peeled off, blocking the exits and locking the doors. Jax turned to the back seat of the second SUV. "Get him out! Move, move, move!" They dragged a body out of the back seat, a man in his 40s wearing a torn flight suit. He was soaked in blood. His complexion was grey. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen. Through and through," Jax yelled. "And shrapnel in the chest. He's tensioning. We need a trauma team now." Dr. Hansen stood up, shaking. I can bring him to Trauma 1. "Don't touch him," Jax snarled, shoving Hansen back. "I need a surgeon who knows how to handle a blast injury. He's got unexploded ordnance embedded in the chest wall." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence filled the room. Unexploded ordnance. A bomb inside the patient. Dr. Hansen turned white. We have to evacuate. We can't operate on a live explosive. We need the bomb squad. He has 2 minutes before he bleeds out," Jax screamed, grabbing Hansen by the scrubs. "You operate now, or I blow your head off." "I can't," Hansen sobbed. "I don't know how. I'll kill us all." The SEAL team looked around, desperation breaking through their discipline. Their leader, their captain, was dying on a gurney in a civilian hospital, and the doctor was a coward. "Is there anyone here who isn't a coward?" Jax roared. From the shadows of the supply closet, a voice cut through the panic. It was dry, raspy, and completely calm. "Lower your weapon, Chief. You're scaring the children." Marty O'Connell stepped into the light. She wasn't holding her hands up. She was putting on a pair of latex gloves. Snap! Snap! Jack spun around, his rifle aiming at her center mass. "Back off, Grandma. This doesn't concern you." Marty ignored the gun. She walked straight up to the gurney, looking down at the dying man. She looked at the blood pattern. She looked at the distended veins in his neck. "He's not tensioning from the shrapnel," she said, her voice flat. "He's got a pericardial tamponade. The sac around his heart is filling with blood. If you don't drain it in 30 seconds, his heart stops and he dies." Jax stared at her. "How do you—" "Hansen," Marty barked, not looking at the doctor. "Get me an 18-gauge spinal needle and a 50cc syringe. Kieran, get the crash cart. Move." "Marty, don't," Kevin screamed from the floor. "It's a bomb. It's against protocol." Marty turned her head slowly and looked at Kevin. For the first time in 3 months, he saw her eyes. Really saw them. They were ice blue, and they were terrifying. "Mr. Julius," she said, "shut the hell up." She turned back to Jax. She looked him dead in the eye, ignoring the suppressed muzzle of his rifle inches from her face. "You want him to live, sailor? Then get your team out of my light and hand me that betadine." Jax hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at the old woman. He saw the way she stood. He saw the grip she had on the patient's shoulder. He lowered the weapon. "Clear the way," Jax ordered his men. "Let her work." The trauma room 1 was a scene of controlled chaos, but the chaos was all external. Inside the sterile circle around the patient, Marty O'Connell was a monolith of calm. The patient, Captain Elias Graves, was fading fast. His skin was clammy, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. "Kieran, cut the clothes! Everything off!" Marty ordered. Her arthritic hands, usually so stiff, were moving with a fluidity that Kieran had never seen. It was muscle memory, ancient, deep-seated muscle memory taking over. "What about the ordnance?" Kieran whispered, her hands shaking as she scissored through the flight suit. "If it was going to blow, it would have blown when they dragged him out of the truck," Marty said. "Ignore it. Focus on the bleed." Dr. Hansen was cowering in the corner. Kevin Julius was on his cell phone in the hallway, undoubtedly calling the police, or the lawyers, or both. The 4 SEALs stood guard inside the room, their eyes darting from the doors to the windows. They were tense, coiled springs. "BP is 60/40, Kieran called out. "He's crashing." "Needle," Marty demanded. She didn't wait for Hansen. She grabbed the spinal needle from the tray. She found the landmark on Captain Graves's chest, just below the sternum, angled up toward the left shoulder. It was a blind stick. Pericardiocentesis. If she missed, she punctured the heart. If she went too shallow, she hit a lung. "You sure about this?" Jax asked, stepping forward. "If you kill him." "If I don't do this, he's dead already," Marty said. "Hold his legs. He's going to buck." Jax signaled one of his men. They pinned Graves's legs. Marty took a breath. For a second, the hospital faded away. She wasn't in Chicago. She was back in the humid, sticky heat of a MASH tent in the Mekong Delta. The sounds of the mortars were replaced by the storm outside, but the smell of copper blood and fear was exactly the same. Steady ghost, she thought to herself. Just like Saigon. She thrust the needle in. Graves arched his back, a guttural groan escaping his lips. Marty drew back on the plunger. Nothing. "Missed," Jax hissed. "Quiet," Marty snapped. She adjusted the angle by a millimeter, a fraction of a degree. She pulled back again. Dark, non-clotting blood filled the syringe. "Got it," Kieran breathed. "Stabilizing," Marty said, watching the monitor. The heart rate began to drop from a frantic 160 to a manageable 110. The blood pressure crept up. "Pericardium is drained, but we're not out of the woods." She looked at the chest wound. A piece of jagged metal, black and ominous, protruded from the pectoralis major. "That's the UXO?" Marty asked. 20mm fragment, Jax said grimly. "It's got an explosive tip. It didn't trigger on impact." "It's pressing on the subclavian artery," Marty diagnosed, pressing her fingers gently around the wound. "We can't move him to the OR. The vibration of the elevator might set it off." "We have to operate here," Kieran said, horrified. "We?" Marty looked at Kieran. "No. You go. Clear the floor. I need everyone out." "I'm not leaving you, Marty," Kieran said, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm serious, kid. This thing goes off. It takes out this whole room. I've lived my life. You're just starting yours. Go." "No." Kieran planted her feet. Marty looked at the girl. She saw the stubbornness. She nodded. Fine. Suction. Suddenly, the doors to the trauma room banged open. Kevin Julius stood there, flanked by 2 hospital security guards. "Stop right there," Kevin shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Marty. "The police are outside. The SWAT team is en route. You are practicing medicine without a license for this procedure. Security, remove that woman. Remove these men." Jax turned slowly. He looked at the security guards. The guards looked at the SEALs, men who looked like they ate barbed wire for breakfast. And the guards took a step back. They weren't paid enough for this. "Kevin," Marty said, not looking up from the patient, "if you come into this room, you will disturb the air pressure. If you disturb the air pressure, this bomb might detonate. So, unless you want to be scraped off the ceiling, I suggest you close that door." Kevin paled. He looked at the metal shard in the patient's chest. "You're fired, O'Connell!" Kevin shrieked, his voice cracking. "As of this second, you are fired. You have no pension, no benefits, you are nothing." Marty didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on the artery. "Chief," Marty said to Jax, "can you secure my door, please?" Jax nodded to the largest of his men, a giant they called Tiny. Tiny walked over to the door. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed Kevin by the collar of his cheap suit and tossed him into the hallway like a bag of trash. Then he slammed the door and locked it. "Ma'am," Jax said, turning back to Marty. "Police are setting up outside. We have maybe 20 minutes before they breach. They think we're terrorists." "Then we have 20 minutes to get this metal out," Marty said. "Kieran, clamp." As Marty reached for the hemostat, her scrub sleeve rode up again. Under the harsh trauma lights, the sweat had washed away the foundation she usually wore on her arms to hide the age spots. Jax was standing right next to her. He looked down at her arm. He froze. He saw the scar, but more importantly, he saw the tattoo, the one she had tried to burn off. It was faded, but the outline was unmistakable. It was a skull wearing a nurse's cap, with a dagger through the teeth. Beneath it, a faint number. Mac V. Sog, Unit 77. Jax's eyes went wide. He looked from the arm to Marty's face. He looked at the way she held the scalpel, reverse grip, tactical style. He looked at the efficiency of her movements. "Mother of God," Jax whispered. Marty paused. She looked up at him. Her eyes were hard steel. "Is there a problem, Master Chief?" "That tattoo," Jax said, his voice trembling slightly. "Unit 77, the Ghost Unit, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos." Marty didn't answer. She just looked back at the patient. "They said you were a myth," Jax said. "They taught us about you in Buddhas, the angel of the Delta, the woman who walked into firefights with nothing but a medical bag and dragged whole squads out of the jungle." Kieran looked at Marty confused. "Marty? What is he talking about?" Marty sighed, a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 50 years of secrets. "I told you, Kieran," Marty said softly. "I didn't always work in Chicago." She looked at Jax. "Chief, if you know who I am, then you know I don't like to be kept waiting. Hold the retractor. We're going in." Jax Miller, a Tier 1 operator, a man who feared nothing, swallowed hard. He holstered his sidearm. He stepped up to the table. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Ready when you are, ma'am." The silence in Trauma Room 1 was heavier than the lead aprons hanging on the wall. The only sound was the rhythmic whoosh-click of the ventilator Kieran had hooked up to Captain Graves, and the wet, slick sound of Marty's gloves moving inside the open chest cavity. Jax Miller stood at the head of the bed, holding the retractor that kept the incision open. His hands, usually steady enough to snipe a target from a mile away in a crosswind, were white-knuckled. He wasn't looking at the blood. He was looking at Marty. "You're really her," Jax whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "The ghost." We heard the stories in training, but the instructors, they said you were MIA in 72. They said you died in the crash near the Laotian border." Marty didn't look up. Her eyes were locked on the jagged piece of black metal resting millimeters from the captain's aorta. "A lot of people died in 72, Marty murmured. It was easier to let Martha O'Connell die with them. Marty the nurse is quiet. Marty the nurse pays her taxes and mops the floor. The ghost, she had too much red in her ledger." Kieran, standing opposite Marty with the suction wand, looked between the giant soldier and the frail-looking woman she had worked with for 3 years. "Marty?" Kieran asked, her voice trembling. "What is he talking about? What crash?" Marty paused for a microsecond to wipe sweat from her forehead with her shoulder. "Focus, Kieran. If you suction too hard, you collapse the lung. If you don't suction enough, I can't see the bomb. Find the balance." "She's not just a nurse, kid," Jax said, his eyes filled with a reverence that bordered on religious. "In 1968, there was a classified unit, Mac VSOG. They went places the US government said we weren't. Places that didn't exist on the map. They needed medics, but they couldn't send regular corpsmen. They needed people who could shoot, move, and operate in the mud while being hunted." Jax looked down at the captain's chest. "They recruited from the civilian sector. Radical trauma specialists, adrenaline junkies, patriots. Legend has it, there was a woman who volunteered. She ran 12 missions into Cambodia. They say she once performed a thoracotomy, cracking a chest open, in the back of a moving jeep while returning fire with an M16. Kieran stared at Marty. She tried to reconcile the image of this little old lady who knit sweaters in the break room with the Valkyrie Jax was describing. "Is it true?" Kieran asked. Marty sighed. Her hand was deep in the captain's chest now. Her fingers were wrapped gently around the base of the explosive fragment. "The jeep wasn't moving," Marty corrected softly. "We had hit a mine. The driver was dead, and it wasn't an M16. It was a 1911 pistol. But yes." I cracked the chest. Jax let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 years. "My God." "Save the hero worship for the history books, Chief," Marty snapped, her tone shifting back to icy professionalism. "We have a problem. The fragment is barbed. It's hooked into the intercostal muscle. If I pull it, it rips the artery. If I twist it, the friction triggers the explosive." "What do we do?" Jax asked. Marty closed her eyes for a second. She visualized the anatomy. She visualized the mechanism of the bomb. "I need a barrier," she said. "Something distinct. Kieran, in the supply cabinet, bottom shelf. There's a box of sterile plastic speculums. Get me the largest one." "A speculum?" Kieran asked. "It's hard plastic. Concave. If I slide it under the barb, I can create a ramp. I can slide the metal out without it touching the tissue." "And if the friction against the plastic sets it off?" Jax asked. Marty looked at him. A dry, humorless smile touched her lips. "Then we won't have to worry about the paperwork, will we?" Kieran ran to the cabinet. She handed the instrument to Marty. "Okay," Marty said. "Chief, when I say go, I need you to stop breathing. Literally. I need your hands to be stone. If you twitch, we die." "Understood, Mom." "Kieran, grab the lead blanket. Stand behind the crash cart. If this goes wrong, I want you to have a chance." "I'm staying," Kieran said, her chin trembling, but her feet planted. Marty looked at the girl. She saw the steel forming in Kieran's spine. The torch was passing. "Good girl. Stay low." Marty inserted the plastic tool. She slid it slowly, agonizingly slowly, under the jagged black metal. Scrape. The sound was tiny, but in the silent room, it sounded like a gunshot. Marty froze. The heart monitor beeped. Beep, beep, beep. She pushed a millimeter further. The barb disengaged from the muscle. Now, Marty whispered. With a fluid motion that defied her 70 years, she lifted the fragment out of the chest cavity. It was heavy, black, and radiated a cold malice. She held it in the air. "Container!" she barked. Jax kicked a metal kidney basin across the floor. Marty gently lowered the explosive into the basin. "Tiny!" Jax yelled at the door. The giant seal opened the door a crack. He saw the object in the basin. He didn't flinch. He walked in, picked up the basin with hands the size of shovels, and walked it to the far corner of the room, covering it with 3 heavy lead vests. "Ordnance secured," Tiny rumbled. Marty slumped against the operating table. The adrenaline dump hit her all at once. Her knees buckled. Jax caught her. He grabbed her arm, the one with the scar, and held her up. "Easy, Mom. You got him. He's stable." Marty looked at the monitor. Captain Graves's heart rhythm was strong. The bleeding had stopped. "Close him up, Kieran," Marty wheezed. "Staples for the skin. Drain tubes in the pleural space. You know the drill." "I got it, Marty," Kieran said, working fast. "We need to move," Jax said, checking his watch. "That admin, the one in the cheap suit, he's not done. I can hear sirens. A lot of them." Marty straightened her scrubs. She washed the blood off her gloves, but didn't take them off. "Kevin Julius," she said with disgust. "He's a petty, small man. He's going to bring the whole Chicago PD down on us, just to prove he has power." "We can fight our way out," Tiny said from the corner, his hand resting on his rifle. "No," Marty said firmly. "This is a hospital. There are sick people in the waiting room. There are babies in the NICU. No shooting." "Then how do we get out?" Jax asked. "They likely have the building surrounded. They think we're terrorists." Marty walked to the counter and picked up her old, battered purse. She pulled out a tube of lipstick and applied it, using the reflection in the metal cabinet. It was a shade of red she hadn't worn since 1975. "You don't get out, Chief," she said, turning to face the 4 heavily armed men. "I walk you out." Outside the emergency room entrance, the scene was apocalyptic. Kevin Julius had done his job well. Too well. He had called 911 and screamed about heavily armed paramilitaries, hostages, and bombs. He had neglected to mention the dying patient. The result was a sea of flashing blue and red lights. The Chicago PD had established a hard perimeter. SWAT vans were parked on the lawn. Snipers were setting up on the roof of the parking garage across the street. A police negotiator, Detective Miller, no relation to Jax, was crouching behind a squad car, bullhorn in hand. "This is the Chicago Police," the voice boomed, distorting over the feedback. "We have the building surrounded. Release the hostages and come out with your hands up." Inside the ER lobby, chaos reigned. Patients were huddled under chairs. Kevin Julius was hiding behind the reception desk, looking pale and sweaty, realizing he might have escalated this too far. "They're going to breach," Kevin whimpered to the triage nurse. "They're going to kill those maniacs." "Those maniacs just saved a life," the triage nurse hissed back, "which is more than you've done all year." Suddenly, the double doors to the trauma hallway swung open. The lobby went silent. It wasn't a flash-bang grenade. It wasn't a squad of shooters. It was Marty O'Connell. She walked slowly, her head held high. She had removed her bloodied gown, revealing her navy blue scrubs. She looked small, frail, and utterly unimpressed by the dozen police officers pointing Glocks at her through the glass sliding doors. Behind her, moving in a diamond formation, were the 4 SEALs. They carried the stretcher. Captain Graves was unconscious but alive, an IV bag held aloft by Kieran, who walked alongside them. The SEALs had their weapons lowered, but not holstered. They scanned the room with predatory intensity. "Hold fire!" Detective Miller screamed into his radio. "Civilian in the line of fire. It's It's a nurse." Marty walked straight to the sliding glass doors. They didn't open. The power had been cut by the police. She knocked on the glass. Rap, rap, rap. "Open this door!" she shouted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a tone of authority that cut through the glass. Detective Miller stood up, waving his hands. "Ma'am, get down! Get away from those men! They are dangerous!" Marty rolled her eyes. She grabbed the manual release lever on the door and forced it open. The cold wind and snow blasted into the lobby, whipping her grey hair around her face. She stepped out onto the pavement. The red laser dots of a dozen snipers danced on her chest. Jax stepped out behind her, shielding the patient with his own body. Tiny and the other two SEALs formed a perimeter, their backs to the patient, facing the cops. It was a Mexican standoff of the highest order. "Hands up! Drop the weapons!" the SWAT commander screamed, rushing forward with his shield raised. "Stand down!" Marty yelled back. She walked right up to the SWAT commander, a man twice her size wearing 50 pounds of gear. She pointed a finger in his face. "Lieutenant, if you discharge a weapon in front of my hospital, I will personally ensure you are demoted to traffic duty in the Loop for the rest of your miserable career." The lieutenant blinked. He looked at the little old lady. He looked at the SEALs behind her. "Ma'am, these men are armed terrorists who invaded—" "These men are United States Naval Special Warfare operators," Marty interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "They have a critically wounded officer who requires immediate transport to Great Lakes Naval Hospital. We stabilized him, but he needs an ICU. Now get your toy trucks out of the way." Kevin Julius ran out the door, emboldened by the police presence. "She's lying," Kevin shrieked, pointing at Marty. "She's in on it. She let them in. She violated protocol. Arrest her. Arrest all of them." The SWAT commander looked confused. The situation was foobar. He had an hysterical administrator, a calm but terrifying grandmother, and 4 heavy hitters who looked like they could kill his whole squad before breakfast. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification from these men," the commander said, trying to regain control. "And I need to secure their weapons." Jack stepped forward. "I'm Master Chief Jackson Miller, SEAL Team 6. This is Captain Elias Graves. We were conducting a covert extraction when our bird went down. We don't carry ID on mission, and you are not touching my weapon." The tension ratcheted up again. Fingers tightened on triggers. "I don't care who you are," the commander said. "You're on civilian soil with automatic weapons. Stand down or we will engage." Jax's eyes narrowed. "Try it." "Stop!" Marty screamed. She reached into a scrub pocket, but she didn't pull out a phone. She pulled out an old, tarnished coin. A challenge coin. She held it up to the SWAT commander. "Do you know what this is, son?" The commander squinted. It was a heavy brass coin. On one side, the Special Forces crest. On the other, the Mac V-SOG skull. But it was the inscription on the rim that caught his eye. "Presented by the President of the United States." "I haven't carried this in 40 years, Marty said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "I keep it in my sock drawer, but tonight I'm cashing it in." She looked the commander in the eye. "Call the number on the back of this coin. It's a direct line to the Pentagon. Tell them the Ghost is calling in a favor. Tell them Unit 77 is active." The commander hesitated. He looked at the coin. He looked at the seriousness in Marty's face. "Do it," Jax growled. The commander took the coin. He pulled out his radio. He patched through to dispatch, giving them the number. A minute passed. The snow fell silently. The only sound was the wind. Then, the commander's radio crackled. The voice on the other end wasn't the dispatcher. It was a panicked voice from the station chief. "Lieutenant, stand down. Repeat, stand down immediately. We just got a call from the Secretary of Defense. He wants to know why you are holding a gun on a national hero." The color drained from the commander's face. He lowered his weapon. He signaled his team. "Weapons tight! Stand down! Clear the perimeter!" He looked at Marty with new eyes. He handed the coin back to her with trembling hands. I apologize, Ma'am. We didn't know." Marty snatched the coin back. "They never do." She turned to Jax. "The road is clear, Chief. Get your captain home." Jax nodded, but he didn't move. He looked at the massive black SUV that the police were now moving their cruisers away from. Then he looked at Marty. "We have an extract chopper inbound to the local airfield," Jax said. "But I can't leave you here, Ma'am." "I'm retired, Chief," Marty said, looking at the hospital building. "My shift ended 10 minutes ago." "You think he's going to let you walk away?" Jax gestured to Kevin Julius, who was currently screaming at a police sergeant, demanding Marty's arrest. "He's going to bury you. Lawsuits. Press. They'll strip your pension. They'll destroy your life." Marty looked at Kevin. She knew Jax was right. Kevin was vindictive. He would paint her as a reckless endangerment to the hospital. She would spend her retirement in court battles. "I don't have anywhere else to go," Marty said quietly. "This place, this was it." Jax smiled. It was a dangerous, wolfish smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the Navy takes care of its own. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not a civilian. You're Unit 77. He tapped his earpiece. "Viper 1, this is ground actual. Update extraction manifest. +1 PAX. Non-ambulatory. Negative. She's a VIP. Repeat, VIP extraction." Marty looked at him. "What are you doing, Chief?" Jax opened the back door of the SUV. "We need a medic for the flight, Ma'am. Kieran here is good, but she's green. I need the best. I need the ghost." Marty looked at the open door. Then she looked back at the hospital. She saw the flickering fluorescent lights. She saw the mopped floors. She saw Kevin Julius's red, angry face. Then she looked at the dark interior of the tactical vehicle. It smelled of gun oil and adventure. It smelled like her youth. Kieran nudged her arm. "Go, Marty. You saved everyone. Now save yourself." Marty O'Connell took a deep breath of the freezing Chicago air. She dropped her hospital ID badge on the snowy pavement. "Well," she said, a spark lighting up her eyes that hadn't been there in decades, "I suppose I can ride along, just to make sure you boys don't mess up my sutures." "Hoo-yah, Ma'am," Jax said. Marty climbed into the SUV. The door slammed shut, sealing her in darkness and safety. The engine roared. The convoy peeled out, flanked by a police escort that was now terrified of the little old lady in the back seat. As they sped away, Marty didn't look back at St. Jude's Medical Center. She looked forward. But the story wasn't over. Because the world was about to find out exactly who Martha O'Connell really was. The morning sun rose over Chicago, cold and brilliant, reflecting off the fresh snow that blanketed the city. But at St. Jude's Medical Center, the heat was rising. Kevin Julius had spent the night spinning his narrative. He was a man possessed by the need to cover his own cowardice. By 8 a.m. he had contacted every local news station, painting a picture of a rogue employee who had endangered the hospital and violated federal laws. He stood on the steps of the hospital, shivering in his suit, surrounded by microphones. It was a terrifying situation, Kevin told the reporters, practicing the sad, concerned face he had rehearsed in the mirror. We had armed intruders. And this nurse, Martha O'Connell, she snapped. She aided them. She brought explosives into a trauma room. She put every patient in this building at risk. We have already filed charges for reckless endangerment and practicing medicine without a license. She will never work in healthcare again. The reporters scribbled furiously. "Rogue nurse endangers babies," the headlines would read. "Senile employee aids gunman." Inside the hospital, the staff watched the TVs in the break room, in stunned silence. Kieran Jenkins was crying quietly. They felt powerless. Kevin had the lawyers, the administration, and the narrative on his side. Marty was gone, vanished into the night with the seals, and now her legacy was being dragged through the mud. But Kevin Julius had made a critical miscalculation. He thought he was fighting a retired nurse. He didn't realize he was picking a fight with the United States Department of Defense. At 10:15 a.m., the news feed on the breakroom TV flickered. The local broadcast of Kevin's press conference was suddenly cut off. The screen went black for a second, then replaced by the official seal of the White House. We interrupt this broadcast for a breaking announcement from the press secretary. The room went deadly silent. Even Kevin, who was watching the feed on his phone outside, froze. The White House press secretary stepped up to the podium. She looked serious, holding a thick leather binder. "Good morning," she began. "Earlier today, reports emerged from Chicago regarding an incident at St. Jude's Medical Center involving a U.S. Navy Special Warfare team and a civilian nurse." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "The narrative currently circulating in the press is incorrect. The Department of Defense has authorized the immediate declassification of File -89 Alpha Ghost. We are correcting the record." A photo appeared on the screen beside her. It wasn't the old grey-haired Marty. It was a black-and-white photo from 1969. It showed a young woman in jungle fatigues, mud smeared on her face, holding an IV bag in one hand and a 1911 pistol in the other, standing over a wounded soldier in a rice paddy. Her eyes were fierce, undeniable. "The woman known as Martha O'Connell," the secretary continued, "was a member of the elite MAC V Sogji Task Force, Unit 77. She was one of only 3 female operatives to serve in forward combat roles during the Vietnam War under the classified Phantom program." Gasps rang out in the St. Jude's breakroom. Dr. Hansen dropped his coffee mug. It shattered, but no one moved. "Between 1968 and 1972, the secretary read, Operative O'Connell is credited with 142 confirmed combat extractions. She is directly responsible for saving the lives of over 300 American servicemen. She was awarded the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, and 3 Purple Hearts, all classified and never publicly worn." The screen changed to a document, a death certificate. In 1972, her helicopter was shot down over Laos. She was presumed dead. She survived in the jungle for 3 weeks, evading capture and carrying a wounded pilot on her back for 40 miles to safety. When she returned, she declined reinstatement. She chose to disappear. She surrendered her rank, her pension, and her glory to live a quiet life of service as a civilian nurse. The press secretary closed the binder. Last night, Operative O'Connell did not endanger the hospital. She successfully performed a field surgical procedure on a high-value asset, Captain Elias Graves, removing an unexploded ordnance that would have detonated if not for her expertise. She saved the patient. She saved the hospital. She saved the city of Chicago from a potential mass casualty event. The camera zoomed in on the secretary's face. "The President has ordered that all charges against Miss O'Connell be dropped immediately. Furthermore, the administration of St. Jude's Medical Center is under investigation for obstruction of a federal operation." Outside on the steps, Kevin Julius watched the broadcast on a reporter's iPad. His face turned the color of ash. The reporters, realizing the scoop had just shifted 180 degrees, turned their microphones toward Kevin. They weren't friendly anymore. "Mr. Julius," a reporter shouted, "did you know she was a war hero? Mr. Julius, why did you try to have a Silver Star recipient arrested? Mr. Julius, is it true you tried to stop a life-saving surgery?" Kevin backed away, stammering. I was following protocol. She didn't have a badge. No comment." He turned and ran back toward the hospital doors, but the security guards, the same ones he had ordered to remove Marty, stood in front of the entrance. They crossed their arms. "ID, please," the head guard said, smiling grimly. "You know who I am," Kevin screamed. "Sorry, sir. Access denied. You're under investigation. You can wait on the sidewalk." Inside the break room, the nurses and doctors erupted into cheers. Kieran Jenkins sobbed openly, hugging the triage nurse. They had known Marty was special, but they had never known she was a giant. The invisible woman was invisible no more. 6 months later. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom in Washington, D.C., painting the city in soft pinks and whites. The air was warm, a stark contrast to the freezing blizzard in Chicago that fateful night. The East Room of the White House was packed. It was a sea of uniforms. Navy whites, army greens, marine blues. Admirals, generals, and senators stood shoulder to shoulder. At the front of the room, sitting in a wheelchair she didn't really need, but was forced to use by the fussing Navy doctors, was Marty O'Connell. She looked different. Her grey hair was neatly styled. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a tailored navy blue dress suit, and on her lapel, gleaming under the chandeliers, were her old ribbons, restored and pinned by Kieran Jenkins, who sat in the front row as her guest of honor. Next to Marty stood 4 men. Jax Miller, Tiny, the other 2 SEALs from that night, and standing tall, looking healthy, despite the faint scar on his chest, was Captain Elias Graves. The President of the United States stepped to the podium. "We tell stories of heroes," the President said, his voice echoing in the hush. "We watch movies about them. But rarely do we get to meet the ones who don't want to be found. The ones who do the work in the dark so we can live in the light." He looked down at Marty. For 50 years, Martha O'Connell scrubbed floors. She emptied bedpans. She was yelled at by administrators. She was ignored. She accepted a humble life because she felt her debt to her fallen comrades in 1972 could never be repaid. "But Marty, you didn't owe us anything. We owed you." The President nodded to the military aide. "Attention to orders." The room snapped to attention. The sound of hundreds of heels clicking together was like a rifle shot. "The President of the United States, in the name of Congress, takes pride in presenting the Medal of Honor to Martha J. O'Connell." Marty gasped. She had expected her old medals back. She hadn't expected this. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. The citation was read. It detailed the mission in Laos in 1972, and it detailed the actions in Chicago. It connected the 2 lives of Marty O'Connell, the warrior and the healer, into one seamless tapestry of courage. The President stepped down. Marty stood up. She refused the cane. She stood tall, 5 foot nothing of pure iron. The President placed the blue ribbon around her neck. The gold star rested against her chest. Tears streamed down Marty's weathered cheeks. For the first time in 50 years, she didn't feel the weight of the ghosts she had left behind in the jungle. She felt light. She turned to face the room. Captain Graves stepped forward. He didn't salute the President first. He turned to Marty. He raised his hand in a slow, crisp salute. "Thank you, Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Jax Miller followed, then Tiny, then the admirals, then the generals. The entire room, the most powerful people on the planet, stood and saluted the little nurse from Chicago. Marty looked at Kieran in the front row. Kieran was beaming, holding up her phone to record it, mouthing the words, "You did it, Marty." Marty O'Connell, the ghost of Unit 77, the night nurse of St. Jude's, slowly raised her hand and returned the salute. Marty never went back to work at the hospital, but she did go back to visit. St. Jude's had changed. Kevin Julius was gone, fired, sued, and currently working at a car rental agency near the airport. In the lobby of the ER, there was a new addition, a bronze plaque mounted on the wall near the trauma rooms. It didn't list the donors or the administrators. It had a picture of Marty, smiling, and the inscription read, "In honor of Nurse Martha O'Connell, here walked a giant. She taught us that a hero isn't defined by the rank on their collar, but by the heart in their chest." Marty stood before the plaque one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was wearing a trench coat, holding a coffee. Arthur, the homeless man she used to care for, shuffled up to her. He looked cleaner. Someone had finally gotten him into a shelter program, funded by a mysterious anonymous donation that the staff suspected came from a certain retired nurse. "That's a nice picture, Marty," Arthur said. "Doesn't do you justice, though. Makes you look too nice." Marty laughed. It was a rasping, joyful sound. "Careful, Artie. I'm retired, not dead. I can still kick your butt." "I know, Mum," Arthur said, winking. "I know." Marty patted his arm, turned, and walked out the automatic doors. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. She walked to the curb where a black SUV was waiting. Jax was leaning against the hood, wearing civilian clothes and sunglasses. He opened the door for her. "Where to, Ma'am?" Jax asked. Marty looked at the horizon. She had spent 45 years waiting to die. Now she had a lot of living to catch up on. "Drive, Chief," she said, climbing in. "I hear the fishing in Montana is good this time of year." "Yes, Ma'am. Montana it is." The SUV pulled away, merging into the traffic, disappearing into the flow of life. Not invisible, just free. Marty O'Connell spent a lifetime being overlooked, treated like part of the furniture, while carrying the weight of 100 battles in silence. She proves that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet person in the corner who holds the world together when it starts to fall apart. Kevin Julius judged her by her age and her job title, but the SEALs judged her by her actions. It makes you wonder, how many heroes are walking past us every day, disguised in scrubs, uniforms, or work boots, just waiting for their moment? If you were in that trauma room, would you have risked your career to save the enemy, or played it safe like the administrator? Let me know your answer in the comments below. If Marty's story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share real stories of heroism with more people. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Until next time, stay safe and respect the quiet ones.